We start with some breaking news on this diplomatic rift between the UK and the United States. We are getting reports that the British ambassador to Washington, Sir Kim Darroch, has resigned. Now, this comes to remind you after President Trump stepped up his attack on Sir Kim, saying we will no longer deal with him. There were emails from Sir Kim that were leaked on Sunday describing Mr Trump's administration as dysfunctional and inept. We heard then from the British Prime Minister Theresa May, who did say she had full faith in Sir Kim, but did not agree with him on everything. But this has turned into a massive diplomatic row between the two countries because, of course, Britain also due to have a new Prime Minister soon. Rob Watson is with me now. A very difficult position for Sir Kim to be put into, Rob, and now this news that he has resigned.
Yes, essentially he has fallen on his sword. I think I may as well just read you some of his resignation letter. He writes that since the leak of official documents from this embassy, there has been a great deal of speculation surrounding my position and the duration of my remaining term as ambassador. I want to put an end to that speculation. The current situation is making it impossible for me to carry out my role as I would like. And he's saying, although he was supposed to stay on in Washington until the end of this year, he is resigning
because
right
he did
away.
have the support of the Prime Minister, Theresa May.
He had the support of the Prime Minister, he had the support of the current Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt. He certainly had the support, I think, of his colleagues in the diplomatic service, and this idea that no head of a foreign state should be allowed to choose or influence who the UK has as its ambassador in any particular place. But I guess he felt, for just sort of purely logistical reasons, if the president has said he's not going to deal with you, and if in a way you've become the story, which I think most British civil servants and certainly most British diplomats would want to avoid. I mean, I think that makes them feel rather uncomfortable.
There was so much speculation around political motivations for the leak and who might benefit. Who does?
Well, I always thought there were only two explanations for this leak. I mean, one is that it's basically a leak by Brexiteers. Brexiteers who think that Britain's decision to vote to leave the European Union necessarily means, and they would welcome this, a pivot by London away from Brussels, more towards Washington, and they sort of felt, look, you need to have someone there, our man, who actually believes in this pivot. So it was either someone who felt that, or someone who felt that one of the crazy things about Brexit was this pivot from Brussels to Washington, and that leaking this memo would have shown, or these memos would have shown just what the dangers are in Britain being closer to the US, particularly when you have someone like Donald Trump in the White House.
Yeah, Rob, we were to talk later on on GMT about the leadership debate last night, because Britain is about to have a new Prime Minister, but let's talk about it now because it's so relevant. Boris Johnson is the favourite to be the next Prime Minister. Did he address this issue in a debate last night?
Yes, I mean, interestingly, one of the most striking differences between Mr Johnson and his rival Jeremy Hunt was Jeremy Hunt made it pretty clear that, look, this behaviour of the US president was disrespectful, and if he became Prime Minister, Sir Kim would be staying in his job. Whereas Boris Johnson had kind of definitely eschewed doing that Love Actually moment, that let's stand up to the bully in the White House. His was much more placing the emphasis on the most important thing here is maintaining good relations, even repairing relations between the UK and the White House.
Just to be clear, though, Sir Kim was just doing his job, wasn't he? Reporting back to London what his thoughts were on the current administration and the White House.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think anyone's saying, everyone is understanding that the role of diplomats is to give frank advice, but just like everything else in this country, and it's really important that everyone should know this, of course it splits, the reactions to this story splits along Remain, Leave lines. So you have Brexiteers in this country, by and large, saying, well, you know, he shouldn't have been saying such disobliging things, even if it's his job, and in the end, it'll be better to have someone in the White House who really believes, in Washington, who really believes in this pivot. Whereas Leave, people who are on the Remain side have been saying, my goodness, what is going on? That you could have a president of the United States kind of insult the British Prime Minister and take a swipe at the ambassador, and everyone say, oh well, and shrug their shoulders. Entirely split reaction, mostly split along that sort of the Remain divide, polarisation in this country.
And you mentioned this a bit earlier, but how worried will other ambassadors around the world be, and civil servants, following this? Does this set a sort of dangerous precedent?
I think they will be worried about that, but I bring in a much broader issue, and that's something that we haven't had a chance to discuss because there have been so many other things going on, Lucy, and that is the way in which the way in which the debate about Brexit in this country has become so poisonous that you have seen something that I can't really remember happening much in the last 20, 30 years that I've been doing this on and off, and that is politicians attacking Britain's sort of neutral, supposedly neutral civil service, the people who are supposed to implement government policy, whichever party is in power, and a sort of suspicion has grown up, a hostility between the two. I mean, this is all part of, I guess, what might be described as the sort of surreal post-referendum ongoing political crisis.
And in the mix
country
was this debate last night between Jeremy Hunt and Boris Johnson. Let's just have a listen to the moment, because they were both asked about Sir Kim and whether or not they would back him. Let's have a listen.
I and I alone will decide who takes important and politically sensitive jobs, such as the UK ambassador to the US.
If I am our next Prime Minister, the ambassador in Washington stays, because it's our decision.
So that moment from the two of them last night, a difference of opinion there. There was also some pretty offensive tweets from President Trump about the Prime Minister Theresa May. Do you remember anything like that happening before either, about the way she's handled Brexit, the fact she hasn't taken his advice, President Trump's advice on this?
Goodness, absolutely not. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that since the middle of 2016, that the world has changed, or maybe it's just the Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-American world, that since the referendum in this country and since the election of Donald Trump, sort of things happen on a daily basis, which you would have regarded as kind of crazy in any previous time. I mean, the idea of an American president attacking a British Prime Minister over the most important policy issue, Brexit, facing this country, it's unprecedented. But then, we are in this new time, and I guess you either kind of embrace these things or you think it's all rather worrying.
I think it was Churchill who coined this phrase about the special relationship, Rob. But is the blunt truth as well that the relationship between the UK and the US is now much more important to the UK?
It is, and I think in many ways this is a problem that those on the Brexit side of the argument have to deal with, and it's what we discussed right at the very start, and that is a vote to leave the European Union was necessarily going to involve Britain having to pivot away somewhat from Brussels to being more closely aligned with the United States. That was inevitable, and I suppose you could argue that seemed less of a worrying proposition with someone like Barack Obama in the White House, or President Bush or Clinton, but with someone like President Trump, who is clearly a tricky person to deal with by other foreign politicians, it sort of shows you that the peril, if you like, of that pivot.
Before we let you go, Rob, it is of course Wednesday, so it's Prime Minister's Questions. We are watching
Anyone remember her?
I know, here she is live in Parliament. Can we expect anything dramatic to happen today? I mean, we've given up actually predicting things, haven't we? But what will happen today, do you think, in PMQs?
I've missed what Jeremy Corbyn has gone on so far. I mean, I'm not sure whether Mr. Corbyn would want to sort of talk up at some point the pivot that his party has made, the opposition Labour Party, not yet a kind of an out-and-out anti-Brexit party, but sort of maybe moving a bit in that direction. But I'm sure he's going to want to poke some fun at both Mr. Hunt and Mr. Johnson as potential successors to Theresa May.
We've missed Theresa May speaking, and I just have a urgent wire here saying that she has said Sir Kim Darroch has given a lifetime of service to the UK. So she's obviously responding to this news of the resignation. Let's just remind you of the breaking news that we have here on BBC World News, that the UK's ambassador to the United States, Sir Kim Darroch, has resigned. This is after a leak in which he called the Trump administration inept, which prompted a huge reaction from the White House. President Trump calling him a wacky ambassador. The story has been in the news for the past few days, and as Rob has been saying, it really has divided people here in the UK. And now we are hearing that Sir Kim Darroch has resigned.
And I should add one brief thought, and that is, to some extent, of course, Sir Kim resigning has got the politicians off the hook, in that they don't have to get rid of him. But of course, whoever takes over from Theresa May, and we're very much presuming that will be a Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, will still have to decide, make a tricky decision. Who do you put next?
Well, there had been some speculation that this would even be Nigel Farage.
I think the big question is it going to be another kind of professional career diplomat, which is normally the case, Or does he pick someone with known good contacts with the Trump administration? Watch this space.
Rob, we do have a response to Sir Kim's letter from the head of the diplomatic service, who has said on behalf of the service, I accept your resignation with deep personal regret. Over the last few difficult days, you have behaved as you have always behaved over a long and distinguished career with dignity, professionalism and class. And later goes on to say, we have been lucky to have you as a friend and a colleague. You are the best of us. So resounding endorsement there from the head of the diplomatic service.
Labour is committed to restoring legal aid funding for
We will be returning to the story throughout the day here on BBC World News.